All right, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, before I get started, I'm going to give all the glory and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Merkak B'dash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders at Great Millstone who teach and rule well. And peace and salutations to the elect feeding the sheep of Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, with sincerity and truth and with charity. Yahweh is the true name of the Heavenly Father, in which the world ignorantly calls God. Bahashem means in the name of. Yahweh Shai is the true name of the Son, who the world ignorantly calls JC. His true name is Yahweh Shai. And I'm going to be doing this lesson on basically, brothers, take care of your health, right? Because even though, the Lord, He's going to give His men, new spiritual bodies, right? And Lord willing, I'm one of those men, you still have to take care of your health, while we're in these bodies to the best of our ability, right? And just because we are living in this temporal flesh, right, these temporary fleshly vessels, it doesn't mean we neglect our certain aspects of our life, like health, right? And this is the book of 1 Timothy 4:8, and it says, "For bodily exercise profiteth little, but godliness is profitable unto all things, having promise of the life that now is, and of that which is to come." Right. So bodily exercise, it profiteth little. It still means it still means it has a profit to it, right? It's not as profitable as this wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, right? But it still means there's still a profit to it, right? And we only knew a little bit, about Yahweh Shai and the apostles, right? We know the things that were written, right? But there's probably things that we didn't see, right? That we didn't see from them. Just because something is little doesn't mean it's doesn't have a great effect on our lives. Like I said just now, we knew a little bit about Yahweh Shai, the effect that it has, he has on our life is basically it's so such a great an uncountable number, right? And the scriptures also speak about having faith the size of the mustard seed, right? Can move mountains, roughly paraphrasing, right? So just because something is little profit doesn't mean you can't do it's not profitable at all, right? There's still profit unto it, right? This is the book of 2 Corinthians 2, verse 11. It says, "Lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices." Right? And this is another thing I wanted to speak about in regards to, basically, this devil Esau Edom, he's putting all these different things, in the foods. He's basically, he's been trying to poison us, and this devil, he's basically, he's amazed on. He's probably saying right now, how are these people still not, dead? How are they not dying? With the amount of shit that he's putting in the foods, right? And we can't be ignorant of the things that he does. He puts all these different, different types of chemicals in the food, right? Potassium sorbates, monoamine diglycerides, tricalcium phosphates, trisodium phosphates, all these different food colorings, right? And he knows, from a manufacturer's point of view, he sees it as just straight up chemicals, and he sees people eating it, and he's probably wondering, how are they not dead? And so you have to be extra, even you have to put more emphasis into avoiding these things, right? Obviously, this is not going to be perfect on this side. Because there's chemicals everywhere. There's all these different things, but you have to try to the best of your ability and you see the difference these things do to you. I mean, like, for example, I literally, took like literally just a bite of like a candy, like just the other day, and bro, the second I bit into this thing, you can feel I could feel like some sort of like what's it like? It was like a feeling in my tooth, like immediately just started like just like aching, like almost like these foods that they literally like just eat through your teeth, right? They basically they manipulate your taste buds, right? There's even food scientists that they basically study how malleable food is, like how many bites does it take to eat into an Oreo. How many times can somebody get through a box of Oreos before they're full, or how many Big Mac Whoppers could somebody eat, and keep buying more, until they feel full, right? This is the stuff that this devil does, right? So we can't be ignorant to that, you know what I'm saying? And even the elder apostle Rakah, he was doing a sit down with the brothers from the Great Millstone Chicago camp. He basically was saying, don't eat anything from these, what is it, Fortune 500 companies, or I don't know the exact name of it, but it's don't eat anything from these top 500 fast food companies, Burger King, Wendy's, McDonald's. You have to be honestly, and to be honest, like if you're eating shit like that, that it's pretty fucking stupid, because they're putting human meat in these things, right? Even just meat substitutes, meat glues, right? So if you're still eating these things, you honestly just reconsider. You know what I'm saying? I know there's some brothers, they can't afford certain foods, and some people are able to buy other things, especially, and some people are not, especially in this economy. But there's other things you can eat besides McDonald's and Whoppers. You know what I'm saying? These aren't even foods, man. They're experiments, experimental drugs. You know what I'm saying? And not only that, I mean, a lot of these foods they put different pork in them. Cook them with pork grease. This is just it's just trash. And there's so many other things. Different herbs, different fruits that you could eat. You know what I'm saying? There's even people, I've met people, they've never even ate like grapes before. They never even like ate grapes in their life, never eaten fruit, and then they eat it for the first time. You know what I'm saying? They go their whole life eating, all sorts of candies, right? Just things that just mess, just crazy, they take different, drugs and stuff. And they've never eaten a fruit in their life, bro. You know what I'm saying? And the scriptures, they tell us, not to ignore these things, right? These different herbs, different fruits. This is the book of Ecclesiasticus, chapter 38:4, and it says, "The Lord hath created medicines out of the earth, and he that is wise will not abhor them." And there's even one of the brothers from the GMS Chicago camp. They even mentioned during when these famines happen, people are going to be walking past, fully grown meals, bro, without even realizing it. You have these different roots in the ground, for example, dandelion root, that they often actually spray this with pesticides, and kill them because they're actually so beneficial to combating heart disease. Right, and so you can actually this is basically a full meal, right? And basically you're gonna have people, they're just gonna be walking past these things, starving, You know what I'm saying? Because they don't have McDonald's. They don't have Jack in the Box, right? So or whatever these people eat nowadays. You know what I'm saying? But it says he that is wise will not abhor them, right? So you won't look at those things and be like, oh, I don't want that. You'll actually take heed to what these the properties that these things have. All right, you'll see these different plants. You'll see the value that the Lord, Yahweh B'Hashem Yahushai put into them. All right, and these are some of the strongest medicines out there. And and just another thing, there's a lot of just foods out there that are just complete trash, and people are now starting to see, and even these like their own company, these own companies are starting to admit, former CEOs of companies and different employees saying, Campbell's, you had the Campbell's soup former employee. He was basically saying, nobody wants chicken or meat that comes from a 3D printer, right? And so just telling you that their food is genetically modified, right? And there's so many different, they've done so many different tests, on animals, and see how they respond to these genetically modified foods, and it ultimately they're basically they start growing tumors and all sorts of crazy just abnormalities, right? So that's just all I wanted to speak about, right? Just brothers, you have to continue to take care of your health, take care of yourselves, right? And this goes for myself included. Sometimes I'll be eating just trash food, right? And you sometimes have to you have to tell myself, like, okay, maybe just you have to ration this out for a different time period or something. You can't be eating this shit every day. You know what I'm saying? So Lord willing, this was edifying, right? I'm gonna give all glory and honor to Yahweh B'Hashem Yahushai, B'Hashem or Kakodesh. Double honors to the apostles and the elders at Great Millstone who teach and rule well. And peace and salutations to the Lex the sheep of Yahweh B'Hashem Yahushai. Shalom.